What if everything you thought you knew about our world was a lie, carefully hidden from you for centuries? The truth is out there, and it's more unsettling and more incredible than you could ever imagine. It was late on a Tuesday evening when Samantha Reed, a journalist known for her knack for uncovering hidden stories, first heard the whispers. It wasn't a major lead or an explosive revelation, but rather a conversation overheard in the hallway of a conference she was attending, one where experts discussed everything from global politics to technological advances. But it wasn't the usual topics that caught her attention. No, it was a mention of a forgotten archive, one buried deep within the vaults of a government agency, an archive full of secrets. Secrets about extraterrestrial encounters, the kind of material that would cause global upheaval if it ever saw the light of day. Samantha had always been fascinated by UFOs and the idea of alien life, but she never quite thought she would be the one to uncover the truth. She had written about government cover-ups before, done the typical investigative pieces, but this was different. This wasn't just about uncovering corruption or corporate greed. This was a mystery that could change the entire fabric of human understanding. It felt like a treasure hunt, but instead of gold, the prize was knowledge that could alter reality itself. She started researching in earnest, pulling at every thread she could find. Articles, books, and old reports soon filled her desk, some classified, others long forgotten by the public. The deeper she dug, the more pieces seemed to align, forming a picture she wasn't prepared for, a picture that suggested there was something far more sinister at play, an elaborate conspiracy to cover up not just UFO sightings, but actual encounters with alien beings. There were rumblings of an archive so top secret that even the highest-ranking officials couldn't access it without a special clearance. Every document she unearthed pointed her back to the same place, an obscure government facility tucked away in the Nevada desert. Her instincts told her this was where the answers lay, hidden among endless rows of classified files. But it wasn't just about the documents. It was about something bigger, something that had been hidden for decades, perhaps centuries. Samantha felt a surge of excitement as she realized that she might be the one to uncover the truth, to reveal what the world had been denied for so long. As she continued her investigation, doubts and fear began to creep in. Could she really take this on? The stakes were higher than anything she had ever encountered, and the risks weren't just professional. This was about challenging everything humanity thought it knew about its place in the universe. But the more she uncovered, the harder it became to stop. The truth was out there, and for the first time, Samantha believed she might be the one to find it. The more Samantha dug into the whispers, the more they seemed to slip through her fingers. But there was one name that kept appearing in the documents, an elusive figure who had reportedly seen the archives with his own eyes, a former government insider, now living off the grid, far from the watchful eyes of the authorities. His name was Daniel Firth, and he had once been a high-ranking officer in a division dedicated to investigating UFO phenomena. Now, he was a ghost, leaving nothing but a trail of cryptic messages and unverified rumors. At first, Samantha thought it was just another dead end, an anonymous figure hiding behind layers of secrecy. But the more she heard, the more she realized that Firth might be the missing link, the one person who could confirm everything she had been piecing together. The problem was, no one had seen him in years, and those who had were strangely tight-lipped about his whereabouts. It was as if the moment his name was mentioned, people shut down, afraid of saying too much. But Samantha wasn't the type to back down. She began reaching out to old contacts, those who had ties to government circles. Some were helpful, others less so. A few mentioned a remote facility deep in the Nevada desert, an installation so secretive it didn't even exist on most maps. It was a place that didn't just house classified files but was, in fact, the repository for the most sensitive information the government held about extraterrestrial encounters. The same facility that Firth was believed to have worked at before he vanished. The location was rumored to be a labyrinth of corridors and secure rooms, with enough secrets to fill an entire lifetime's worth of stories. But no one could say for sure, not without a direct connection. Samantha's search led her to a series of dead ends, but each dead end felt like one step closer to the truth. She reached out to old friends, tracking down every lead, every small clue that might point her in the direction of Daniel Firth. One afternoon, she received an encrypted message from a source who claimed to have been stationed near the Nevada facility in the early 90s. The message was brief but chilling. "Firth is still out there. Follow the trails of the abandoned projects. They're hidden in plain sight." Samantha's heart raced. This was it. A lead. An actual lead. The Nevada desert. The shadowy facility. Firth's name once again drifting to the surface. She knew she had to go. No matter the risk, no matter how deep she had to dig, Samantha was determined to find him. The truth was waiting, and she was closer than ever to uncovering it. Samantha's journey took her to the edge of one of the most famous mysteries in the world, Area 51. The name alone evoked a mixture of intrigue, conspiracy, and fear. It wasn't just a military base. It was a symbol of everything the government had concealed about extraterrestrial life. She knew it was a stretch, but the clues pointed here. This was where the whispers of alien research had begun. The stories were too pervasive, too persistent, to ignore any longer. There had to be something buried beneath the surface. Her first step was to meet with retired military personnel who had been stationed in and around the base during the early years of its operations. Most had long since faded into the quiet comfort of civilian life, yet there was still a nervous edge in their voices when the topic of Area 51 came up. Some spoke in hushed tones, others flatly refused to discuss anything about their time there. But a few those willing to speak hinted at a deeper truth, a truth so far removed from the public narrative that it almost felt unreal. One former engineer, Richard Simmons, worked on systems designed to track unidentified objects in the sky. He was tight-lipped at first, but slowly revealed more when Samantha showed him a few of her findings. "We saw things out there, things that shouldn't have been possible," he said, looking around as if to make sure no one was listening. "Craft that defied every principle of aerodynamics we knew. I'm not talking about experimental jets or foreign tech. This was something else entirely." Samantha leaned in, captivated. "What did you see?" Simmons shifted in his chair, his hands trembling. "I'm not saying it was aliens, but I'll tell you this much: whatever it wasn't from this world. There were researchers, scientists working on things I wasn't even allowed to understand. We all were told to look the other way, pretend it wasn't happening." Her mind raced with the implications. There were things out here, at Area 51, that had been kept from the public for decades. But what, and why? Before she could ask more, Simmons' face turned dark, and he suddenly closed off. "I can't say any more," he muttered, standing up abruptly. The encounter left her with more questions than answers. The tension in his voice, the fear in his eyes, it was clear he had seen things he could never fully explain. But his hesitation spoke volumes. The truth, if it was out there, was buried far deeper than she had anticipated. As she left the meeting, Samantha's mind lingered on the one phrase Simmons had said before walking away. "The public isn't ready to hear it. What were they hiding? What did they know that could shatter everything we believed?" The path was narrowing. She was closer to something bigger than she had ever imagined. Samantha's investigation had hit a roadblock. Every lead she chased seemed to disappear into the ether, like vapor fading into the night. But she knew better than to give up. Something was wrong, something was being hidden, and she was getting closer to uncovering it. The breakthrough came when she received an anonymous tip pointing her to a trail of missing government tapes and censored records. These weren't just any documents. They were reports detailing some of the most significant UFO sightings and alien encounters in modern history. The problem was, the tapes had vanished. Or, rather, they had been misplaced, as the government documents put it. Yet the details in the tip were too precise to ignore. Someone was covering their tracks, and Samantha intended to follow that trail. She started digging into the history of classified UFO encounters, focusing on those records that had mysteriously vanished from archives. There were whispers about the tape's footage, audio recordings, and transcripts capturing the most extraordinary events. They included government employees describing incidents so outlandish that they could never have been made public, but somehow they had slipped through the cracks. One particular tape caught her attention. It was recorded during an early UFO encounter over the Nevada desert, a location not far from Area 51. The tape supposedly featured an air traffic controller's frantic attempts to communicate with a strange, unidentifiable object that seemed to violate all airspace protocols. According to her source, the footage was taken just moments before the object disappeared, seemingly vanishing into thin air. Samantha had to know more. Her search led her to an old government office that had been locked up for decades, hidden in plain sight. She met a former archivist named Emily, who had worked there during the late 80s. Emily was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed to meet Samantha, clearly having her own suspicions about what had been erased from the public record. "I don't know who was in charge of all the blackouts, but I remember that tape. It was classified higher than anything I'd ever seen," Emily confessed, her voice low, as if speaking louder might bring someone back to silence her. Emily handed her a worn folder. Inside was a set of partial transcripts, fragments of documents that made no sense on their own, but together painted a disturbing picture. Samantha's eyes scanned the pages, the names of high-ranking officials, a cryptic reference to alien negotiation, and an oddly marked series of dates. The missing tape was nowhere to be found, but the fragments were damning enough. She could feel the weight of something hidden just beneath the surface. As she left the meeting, Samantha's heart raced. The disappearance of those documents wasn't just an accident. It was part of something much larger. Someone had gone to great lengths to erase the truth. But who? And why? She could almost hear the government's collective breath-holding, waiting for someone to finally uncover the truth. The missing tapes were out there, somewhere, and Samantha was going to find them. Samantha sat in her small, cluttered apartment, surrounded by piles of dusty old books and papers she had gathered in her pursuit of the truth. The glow of her computer screen flickered against the shadows of the night as she scanned through centuries of astronomical records. There had to be something, anything, that would link the early discoveries of the cosmos to the strange and elusive phenomenon she was chasing. As she dug deeper, the patterns began to emerge. Historical astronomers, centuries before UFO sightings became commonplace, had documented unusual celestial events that were eerily consistent with modern-day alien encounters. There were accounts from the 16th century of bizarre lights flickering in the sky, described by stargazers as moving stars and flickering comets. In the 1800s, telescopic observers recorded strange, shifting shapes near distant planets, nothing like the usual patterns of asteroids or comets. They, too, were dismissed by the scientific community, relegated to the realm of imagination and mystery. But what if they weren't just figments of a distracted mind? The more Samantha read, the more a peculiar thought gnawed at her. Had governments known about extraterrestrial life long before the modern-day wave of UFO sightings? Early astronomers, with their primitive telescopes, had seen things that defied explanation. These phenomena weren't random, they were deliberate, perhaps even designed. It made her wonder, had there been a secret recognition of alien life for centuries, quietly documented by those who dared to peer into the stars? In one particularly old record, an astronomer from the late 1700s noted a fleet of objects passing by Saturn, their shapes too defined to be natural. He scribbled down his findings in the margins of his notebook, but they were never included in his official reports. Was this an isolated incident? Or had similar sightings been made throughout history? Samantha's mind raced as she sifted through more documents. Some of the references were vague, but they all shared one common thread. Something out there had been watching, or perhaps even communicating. It was as if the search for extraterrestrial life had been ongoing, hidden from public view for centuries. Her eyes fell upon a map of ancient constellations, showing the paths of stars and planets as charted by the earliest astronomers. Several lines seemed to converge at odd angles, pointing toward a small cluster of stars that had long piqued the interest of astrobiologists. Could this be the place? The same area where modern signals had been traced back to, a mysterious radio wave detected by SETI decades ago? Samantha wasn't sure, but something about the consistency of these records felt intentional. It was then that the unsettling thought struck her. What if governments hadn't been trying to discover alien life, but rather had already known about it? Had they been monitoring the stars, waiting for something or someone to return? These ancient observations, lost to time, might have been more than just curiosity. They could have been the first hints of a much deeper, more complex truth, a truth that the world wasn't yet ready to hear. Samantha knew her search was only beginning. She wasn't just uncovering old astronomical records anymore, she was uncovering a secret history that had been buried for centuries. And it was a history that could change everything. Samantha couldn't shake the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something monumental. As she pored over the fragmented texts and symbols from ancient artifacts, a strange repeating pattern emerged. It wasn't like anything she had seen before: intricate geometric shapes, sequences of numbers, and strange markings that, at first glance, seemed random. But there was an eerie consistency, a rhythm that felt deliberate. The symbols appeared in texts from different cultures and eras, each seemingly disconnected, yet each carrying the same cryptic language. There was one piece in particular, a set of carvings from a pre-Columbian civilization, that caught her attention. It was a series of spirals, dots, and lines, etched into a stone tablet found deep in the Andes. The artifact had been dismissed by mainstream archaeologists as mere religious iconography, but the more Samantha stared at it, the more it felt like a message, one that was waiting to be understood. Her mind raced as she recalled a conversation she'd had with a retired cryptographer, a reclusive man named Felix. He was eccentric, his mind a labyrinth of patterns and codes, and he had hinted at a lifetime spent studying unusual encryptions, codes that didn't belong to any known human language. He had once told her that humanity had been deciphering wrong all along. Some patterns weren't meant to be understood by the brain, but rather felt. Samantha made the call. Felix was older now, his once sharp eyes dulled by years of solitude, but there was still a fire in him when it came to puzzles. After a long, hesitant conversation, he agreed to help her. His voice crackled with excitement as he received the images of the artifacts she had sent. Over the next few days, Samantha and Felix exchanged emails, working through the long-forgotten symbols. Felix had his theories, of course, about ancient civilizations trying to communicate with a distant intelligence. But it wasn't until he shared his first breakthrough that Samantha's pulse quickened. One of the patterns the spiral matched an ancient symbol found in a cave painting in Siberia, which was theorized to represent a gateway. Felix theorized that it wasn't a simple gateway, but a coded map, a star chart, encoded into symbols that would only make sense to someone who understood advanced geometry. The code seemed to mimic the patterns of galaxies. Then, a few days later, the breakthrough came. Felix had cracked a segment of the code. The symbols were not random, they were phonetic, each representing a part of a greater language, a language that wasn't human. The words Felix decoded in his email weren't full sentences, but they seemed to speak directly to her. Prepare to open the door. The Watchers return. Her heart raced. Was this the message the ancients had tried to send? And if so, what had they known that we didn't? The idea that these symbols, These messages had been hidden in plain sight for centuries, waiting to be unlocked, felt like the beginning of an entirely new chapter of humanity's history. But one thing was clear: someone, or something, had been trying to communicate with us for far longer than anyone had ever realized. Samantha had always been captivated by the myths of ancient civilizations, those strange and timeless stories that spoke of gods descending from the sky, of celestial beings who walked among humans. But as her investigation deepened, these stories began to feel less like folklore and more like accounts of something far stranger, something otherworldly. The more she looked, the more connections she found scattered across cultures and continents that suggested these legends weren't just metaphorical, but possibly literal. The Sumerians, with their tales of the Anunnaki, spoke of beings who came from the stars, beings that shaped humanity. Ancient texts described how these celestial visitors provided the knowledge of agriculture, mathematics, and even language. The Egyptians, too, had their own stories, of gods like Osiris and Ra, who arrived from the heavens to guide their people. There were accounts of sky chariots, of great beings descending from the stars, imparting wisdom, and even altering the course of human development. As Samantha sifted through countless texts, she found a pattern emerging: ancient civilizations, from the Maya to the Chinese to the Aboriginal cultures of Australia, all shared remarkably similar stories. In the Bible, the Book of Enoch spoke of the Watchers, angelic beings who descended to earth and taught humans forbidden knowledge. The ancient Chinese legends of the celestial beings mirrored this in ways that could no longer be ignored. And even the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories from Australia told of beings descending from the stars, bringing wisdom to the land. It was almost as if these accounts were not isolated myths, but fragments of a collective memory, a shared experience of contact. What truly struck her was the symbolism that threaded through these stories. The emphasis on stars, the references to gods who traveled from distant worlds, the consistent mention of advanced knowledge appearing suddenly, and the inexplicable leap in human development. Every culture seemed to point to the same conclusion: human civilization had been touched, shaped, or even guided by forces beyond our understanding. Samantha's pulse quickened as she uncovered more concrete evidence: ancient artifacts that depicted beings not entirely human, but distinctly alien in appearance. The ancient Sumerian cylinder seals, often dismissed as simple artwork, contained depictions of figures with elongated heads, large eyes, and strange attire characteristics that fit the stereotypical alien description. In the ruins of Teotihuacan in Mexico, she found carvings of strange figures with helmets and suits, surrounded by swirling celestial patterns that mirrored the star maps Felix had deciphered. These images weren't just symbolic, they were direct representations of beings from another world, a connection between humanity and extraterrestrials that was hidden in plain sight. The evidence was mounting, and the pieces were starting to align in a way she hadn't anticipated. Could it be that these ancient myths were not the work of creative minds, but the true records of alien contact? And if these beings had truly walked among humanity in ancient times, what had happened to them? Were they still watching, still guiding us from the shadows? Samantha felt she was on the verge of something too big to ignore: a truth about human history that, if revealed, would change everything. Samantha's search had taken her down countless rabbit holes, each more baffling than the last. But nothing had shaken her like the moment she came across the CIA's UFO files. It was as though a dam had broken, and the flood of information began to pour in. What had once been whispered about in secret, buried under layers of bureaucracy, was now just a few clicks away. She found herself scrolling through page after page of heavily redacted reports, memos, and cryptic diagrams, each one containing fragments of a truth she wasn't prepared for. The documents, originally classified and hidden from the public for decades, revealed a disturbing pattern. They were filled with references to UFO sightings that the CIA had been tracking since the 1950s, the era when UFO reports were coming from all corners of the United States. But there was something more, something far more unsettling. Buried deep within these reports were mentions of reverse engineering and alien technology that had been recovered from crash sites, some of which had been kept hidden in secure locations. One document stood out in particular. It was a detailed report from an officer who had been assigned to oversee a top-secret project aimed at analyzing alien materials recovered from a crash in the early 1960s. The report, which was half-redacted, hinted at the discovery of metals that defied the known properties of earthly materials, metals that were lighter, stronger, and more heat-resistant than anything humanity had ever produced. There were references to recovered propulsion systems that no known aircraft could match, systems that had been dismantled and analyzed by a team of scientists, but whose inner workings remained a mystery. The notes were chilling, mentioning that the technology appeared too advanced for contemporary understanding. Samantha's eyes widened as she read further, uncovering more documents that suggested the CIA had been involved in the study and possible exploitation of this alien technology. There were mentions of a secretive program, codenamed Project Black Star, which seemed to focus on understanding and potentially adapting extraterrestrial propulsion systems for military use. As she pieced it together, the government's pursuit of alien technology seemed less about public safety or scientific discovery, and more about harnessing the power of these otherworldly crafts for dominance. But the real shock came when she found the memo, detailing an official cover-up, a memo so heavily redacted that only a handful of lines were legible, but enough to hint at something far more sinister. The document referred to extraction operations and ongoing secrecy concerning extraterrestrial encounters. It seemed as if the CIA wasn't just hiding evidence of UFOs. They were actively erasing the tracks of these discoveries. As she sat back, staring at the glowing screen, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The government wasn't just withholding information, they were actively engaged in studying and possibly even attempting to wield the alien technology that had been in their possession for decades. Samantha realized that the truth she had been chasing was far more dangerous than she had imagined. And now, she was closer than ever to uncovering a secret that could change everything. Samantha had always assumed the stories of the Men in Black were the stuff of conspiracy forums and tall tales, the kind of thing whispered about in dark corners of the internet. But as she started to dig deeper into the hidden world of UFO encounters, she began to hear something unsettling, a pattern of individuals whose lives had been destroyed after revealing too much about what they had seen. One name kept resurfacing: George Patterson, a small-town mechanic who claimed to have witnessed a UFO crash in the Nevada desert in the early 70s. The more Samantha researched, the more she found similar accounts, men and women, ordinary citizens, all describing eerie visits from shadowy figures dressed in black suits, their faces expressionless and cold, their intentions far from clear. Each of these individuals had come forward with stories about extraterrestrial encounters, only to find their lives shattered shortly afterward. Many spoke of intense, almost supernatural pressure to recant their testimonies, threats veiled in the language of discretion and national security. Patterson's story was particularly chilling. He had seen the crash, a saucer-shaped craft that had somehow landed in a remote stretch of desert and had tried to alert local authorities. Within days, men in dark suits showed up at his door. They had no badges, no official paperwork, just an unnatural authority that made everything feel wrong. He recounted how they had demanded that he forget everything, even asking him questions that suggested they knew more about his encounter than he ever had. When Patterson tried to speak out again, he found his business torched, his friends and family turning away, his health deteriorating in inexplicable ways. The Men in Black, as some called them, had left him ruined, silenced, a broken man too afraid to talk. Samantha managed to track down a few others who had faced similar visits. Some were former military personnel, others were ordinary civilians, but all had been part of the same unsettling narrative. They spoke in hushed tones, warning her that asking too many questions would cost her more than just a few sleepless nights. One woman, a retired government contractor, tearfully recounted her experience. She had worked on a project that investigated UFO phenomena, and once she had begun to question the extent of the government's involvement, strange occurrences began. Her phone lines were tapped, her house was broken into. Her daughter, she claimed, had once been approached at school by a man in black who threatened her mother's life if she didn't stop asking about the government's knowledge of extraterrestrial life. The more Samantha listened, the more the chilling reality set in. This wasn't just about uncovering a few secrets, it was about surviving the truth. The men in black weren't just urban legends. They were agents of a silent war, erasing anyone who dared to speak too loudly. And the further she dug, the more she realized that her investigation wasn't just bringing her closer to the truth, it was putting her in the crosshairs of the very same forces that had destroyed so many lives. The Roswell incident had always been a point of UFO lore, a case that was as infamous for its mysterious cover-up as it was for the strange object that crashed in the desert. Samantha had heard the stories of extraterrestrial craft, dead bodies, and a government quick to suppress the truth. But now, as she pored through documents and spoke to the few who still remembered, the magnitude of the deception became undeniable. Her first lead took her to a retired military officer, Colonel Richard Carter, who had been stationed at Roswell Army Airfield in 1947. His voice was gravelly, worn down by years of keeping secrets, but his eyes were sharp when he spoke. Carter recalled the initial reports of a flying disc recovered from the crash site, and how, within hours, the story had shifted. The military, he said, had initially issued a press release confirming the recovery of a UFO, but within days, that narrative vanished. The Army issued a new statement claiming that the object was nothing more than a weather balloon, a flimsy excuse that never quite added up. There were bodies, but not like they told you, Carter said, his eyes flicking nervously to the door. They weren't human. I don't know what they were, but they weren't from this world. We were told to keep our mouths shut, and we did. Some of the younger guys, they saw things they couldn't explain, and they were changed by it. Samantha pressed him on the specifics, but Carter's answers became more evasive, his mind clearly working to suppress memories that had haunted him for decades. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, as if the weight of his silence was finally breaking through. Carter was just one of many witnesses who had been silenced, she knew. As she dug deeper into the records, she came across reports from civilian eyewitnesses, people who had seen the craft fall from the sky, and even more who had ventured into the desert afterward, only to find themselves face to face with government agents who confiscated their film and cameras. One such witness, a local farmer named Clara Jennings, recounted how she had been on her property that fateful summer night when she saw something streak across the sky. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, she said, her hands trembling as she spoke. I thought it was a meteor, but it was too slow, too controlled. It landed in the desert, and the military showed up just hours later. They told us to forget we'd seen anything. Jennings had been one of the first to reach the crash site, and though she had never seen the bodies up close, she had heard the rumors, the whispers about small, gray figures recovered from the wreckage. She spoke of the dead silence that had fallen over the town after the event, of the fear that hung in the air as people began to disappear, their names scrubbed from the town's history. The truth, Samantha realized, had been buried not just in the desert sands, but deep within the machinery of government secrecy. The more she learned, the more she saw that the cover-up wasn't just about hiding the wreckage. It was about controlling the narrative, making sure that the public never connected the dots. The UFO that crashed in Roswell wasn't an isolated incident. It was the beginning of a systematic erasure, a global campaign to keep the existence of extraterrestrial life hidden from the world. And the story, it seemed, was far from over. The infamous alien autopsy footage had been the subject of debate for years. Some believed it was an elaborate hoax, while others swore it was genuine, a glimpse into a truth that the government had desperately tried to suppress. Samantha had seen the grainy footage countless times, the eerie, dispassionate examination of a small humanoid figure lying lifeless on a cold metal table. Its gray skin, large eyes, and delicate features were impossible to forget. Yet, the more she dug into the story behind the footage, the more it became clear that this was a case of deliberate manipulation, a carefully orchestrated piece of disinformation designed to confuse, mislead, and ultimately bury the truth. Her search led her to an underground network of conspiracy theorists who had spent years dissecting every frame of the autopsy video. They argued that the footage was too meticulously staged, too precise in its details to be a simple hoax. This wasn't some bored filmmaker's idea of an alien autopsy, said Richard Houghton, a retired journalist and self-proclaimed UFO researcher who had spent decades investigating the footage. What you're seeing is a government operation, a covert attempt to muddy the waters, to make the real thing seem laughable. Houghton wasn't alone in his convictions. Many of those who believed in the authenticity of the autopsy footage pointed to the strange circumstances surrounding its release. The video had surfaced in 1995, just as the UFO phenomenon was gaining mainstream attention. A mysterious figure named Ray Santilli claimed to have obtained the footage from a former military cameraman who had secretly filmed the autopsy at a top-secret facility in the 1940s. According to Santilli, the footage had been deteriorating for years, and what was released to the public was merely a reconstruction of the original footage, made from the fragments of the original film. The story felt rehearsed, too neat, almost as though it had been crafted to elicit both fascination and skepticism in equal measure. The questions about its authenticity weren't just about the footage itself, it was about what it was meant to achieve. Samantha sat down with some of the most vocal proponents of the footage's authenticity, including Dr. Emily Harris, an anthropologist who had spent years studying the anatomy of the creature in the video. If you look at the body closely, you can see details that don't match anything from our planet, Dr. Harris argued, her eyes gleaming with conviction. The joints, the musculature, it's different from anything we've seen in nature. This is not a mannequin or a puppet. This is a biological specimen, and it's not from Earth. But Samantha was skeptical. She couldn't ignore the mounting evidence of a cover-up, or the possibility that the government had engineered this very controversy to keep people guessing. After all, what better way to divert attention from real alien encounters than to release a piece of fabricated footage that could discredit the entire phenomenon? As she listened to the passionate voices around her, Samantha began to realize that the alien autopsy footage wasn't just a hoax, it was part of a larger, ongoing campaign to control the narrative surrounding extraterrestrial life. If they could convince the world that the truth was nothing more than a sensationalized, staged video, then perhaps they could bury the real evidence forever. Samantha's investigation into hidden alien technology began with whispers of materials that defied known physics, of propulsion systems too advanced for any human engineer to have conceived. These weren't the kinds of tales you found in UFO documentaries or conspiracy forums. These were testimonies from former military insiders, engineers who had worked on classified projects, and those who had seen firsthand the incredible technologies allegedly recovered from UFO crash sites. She had heard about the reverse engineering efforts for years, the mysterious programs that supposedly took place in shadowy government facilities, deep underground or hidden within military complexes. Some of the most compelling stories came from a former engineer named James Carter, who had worked in a top-secret government program focused on studying alien technology. According to Carter, The United States government had recovered materials from UFO crashes as far back as the 1940s, and much of the technology had been quietly integrated into military projects over the decades. They found pieces of something like nothing we've ever seen, Carter told Samantha during a tense interview. We're talking about materials with no molecular structure. We could identify lighter than anything we had, stronger than steel, and capable of withstanding temperatures that should have melted them down. But it wasn't just the materials. It was the propulsion systems. Carter explained that these propulsion systems discovered in UFO wreckage had baffled engineers. Traditional combustion engines were irrelevant in the face of these alien systems, which seemed to defy the laws of physics. What they had, according to Carter, was something that operated using gravitational manipulation, the ability to bend space and time around it. It wasn't just about moving fast, it was about moving in ways that should have been impossible for anything from Earth. The systems allegedly used in UFOs could hover, travel at unimaginable speeds, and shift direction in ways that traditional jet engines or rockets could never accomplish. I was part of a team that studied these things for years, Carter continued, his voice dropping as he leaned in. We couldn't replicate it, no matter how much we tried. But I'm telling you, it was real. And some of it has been incorporated into our military technology, little by little, over the years. Black projects. You've seen the stealth bombers, haven't you? Those weren't built with ordinary materials or methods. Samantha pressed further, but Carter had already said more than he was comfortable with. As he glanced nervously over his shoulder, he abruptly ended the conversation. She was left with more questions than answers, but something about his demeanor, the certainty in his voice, stuck with her. If what he said was true, the government hadn't just been hiding alien encounters, they had been actively studying and integrating alien technology into their most classified military projects for decades. The implications were staggering. These weren't just crashed ships. They were pieces of a puzzle the government had been trying to put together for years. Alien tech, whether fully understood or not, was out there, hidden in plain sight, integrated into the very systems that the public trusted for security and defense. And it was clear now, if Samantha wanted to uncover the full story, she'd have to dig deeper than ever before. Samantha's search for the truth had led her down many dark corridors, hidden government programs, classified files, and whispered accounts of top-secret meetings. But it wasn't until she stumbled upon a thread on an obscure message board that she found herself face to face with something truly dangerous. The Black Vault. The thread, buried under layers of online noise, was little more than a breadcrumb, a cryptic post from an anonymous user who claimed to have worked with classified material. The Black Vault, the user hinted, was a secret digital repository where all the government's most sensitive information on UFOs and extraterrestrial encounters had been stored for decades. Not just UFO sightings or the Roswell incident, but files on reverse-engineered technologies, communications with alien species, and far more. The thread, littered with code and half-baked conspiracy theories, seemed like another dead end, until Samantha noticed a string of encrypted links that pointed to a hidden site. The realization hit her like a wave. This was it. This could be the smoking gun, the one thing that could prove everything she had heard and suspected was real. But accessing the Black Vault wasn't going to be simple. She spent days researching, diving deeper into the dark corners of the internet where few dared to tread. She learned about the elaborate encryption and the extensive firewall protecting the vault, but each step forward was matched by a growing sense of danger. The deeper she went, the more she understood that this wasn't some random leak. There were layers to this digital fortress, designed to keep even the most dedicated investigators at bay. Late one night, after hours of trying to decipher the site's intricate layers of security, Samantha finally made her move. The screen before her flickered as she typed in the last string of characters, her hands shaking. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden click, the site loaded. Her heart raced as she found herself staring at a series of files, long lists of document names, codes, and government seals that she recognized from some of the most famous UFO encounters. The file names were straightforward: Project Moonbeam, R31 Alien Artifact Analysis, extracted signals from Zeta Reticuli. But the most chilling file was one titled Access Denied, Full Clearance Required. Samantha hesitated. Her instincts screamed at her to leave. This was too much. She had already broken so many unspoken rules by gaining access, and yet the lure of the truth was too powerful to ignore. She clicked on the file, and the screen blinked twice before she was suddenly locked out, the digital doors slamming shut behind her. A chilling message popped up. You have been detected. Unauthorized access flagged. Proceed with caution. She sat frozen, staring at the warning, realizing that this wasn't just a digital treasure trove, it was a trap. Someone, somewhere, was watching. But what had she uncovered? What was buried so deep that it required such extreme measures to protect? As she logged off and erased her traces, she knew one thing. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The Black Vault wasn't just a collection of files. It was the government's ultimate safeguard, protecting the truth from ever seeing the light of day. And Samantha had just made herself a target. The deeper Samantha delved into her investigation, the more she began to sense that the UFO phenomenon was only the tip of the iceberg. The patterns in the leaked files, the whispered rumors from former military personnel, and even the breadcrumbs of information hidden in ancient texts all pointed to something far more ambitious than secret government cover-ups. It was the idea of a hidden space program, a covert operation so far-reaching it seemed to defy belief. Her first encounter with the concept came during a quiet interview with a former aerospace engineer named Elias, whose once promising career had been derailed after he claimed to have worked on a classified interstellar project. His words, initially cryptic, began to unravel a story that was too bizarre to ignore. He told Samantha that he had worked for what he called the Black Program, a secret branch of NASA and military contractors, tasked not with exploring space as the public knew it, but with interacting with extraterrestrial life. According to Elias, the program wasn't just theoretical, it was operational. Human crews, he said, had already made trips beyond our solar system. At first, Samantha dismissed it as an outlandish claim, the type of thing conspiracy theorists peddled. But as Elias spoke, his words carried the weight of someone who had seen things no one was supposed to know. He described massive, undisclosed space stations orbiting the Earth facilities hidden from public knowledge, where humans and extraterrestrials exchanged information, technology, and knowledge. It's not just the government, Elias said, leaning forward, his eyes darting around the dimly lit cafe where they met. It's a global network, with nations working together on technology reverse-engineered from alien ships. And we're already operating off-world. Samantha's skepticism was replaced by a creeping realization. Elias wasn't the only one who believed this. Over the following weeks, she tracked down others, former military personnel, retired intelligence officers, and engineers who had quietly disappeared from the public eye. Each one, with their own unique piece of the puzzle, painted a similar picture of a hidden space program operating in the shadows. Some claimed to have worked on ships that used alien technology, propulsion systems capable of bending time and space. Others spoke of top-secret bases on the Moon and Mars, places where human and alien cultures had mingled for decades. The stories were consistent but fragmented. According to one whistleblower, the program had begun in the 1960s, following a deal struck between world governments and extraterrestrial entities. The aliens, it seemed, had been offering technological assistance for years, but in exchange, humanity had agreed to keep their existence hidden and to aid in their own off-planet explorations. The more Samantha pieced together the accounts, the clearer it became. There was a world beyond the one she had known, one where humanity had already made its mark on the stars, hidden in plain sight. But the most terrifying part of it all was the implications. If these missions existed, if they were true, then everything Samantha had believed about human history, technology, and even the future was wrong. She wasn't just uncovering a conspiracy. She was peering into a new chapter of humanity's existence, one that was already unfolding, far beyond the reach of ordinary eyes. The further Samantha dug, the more she began to see a disturbing pattern emerging, a network of power, secrecy, and hidden agendas. It wasn't just the military or covert space programs that had their hands in this. There was something darker, more insidious at play. Whispers of a shadow government, a deep state, began to surface in the interviews she conducted with former politicians and intelligence insiders. These individuals, some of whom had once held powerful positions, spoke of a secret global cabal that had been working with extraterrestrial entities for decades, manipulating world events behind the scenes. Her breakthrough came when she met with Peter Langley, a retired congressman who had served in Washington for over 20 years. He had always been considered a respected figure in politics, but after leaving office, he had become a vocal critic of government secrecy. Langley had grown disillusioned with the system, claiming that the true decisions were made not by elected officials, but by an unseen group of elites, individuals who had their own agenda, one that involved alien involvement on a scale far beyond anything the public could imagine. "The government you think you know," Langley had said in a gravelly voice, sitting across from her in a dimly lit office. "It's a facade. Behind that, there's a much darker machine, a machine that works with extraterrestrials to shape the future of our world. They've been pulling the strings for years, playing a long game." Samantha listened carefully, her pulse quickening. Langley's words seemed far-fetched, but there was an unsettling conviction in his tone. He spoke of an agreement that had been struck between world leaders and alien races, a deal made in the aftermath of World War II, when fear of nuclear war had created the perfect environment for secrecy. The deal, according to Langley, was simple. Humanity would receive advanced technology from the extraterrestrials in exchange for silence, cooperation, and control. In return, the aliens would guide humanity's progress, ensuring that they were steered toward a specific undisclosed goal. "There's an alien agenda," Langley said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And it's not just about technology, it's about control. Control over governments, economies, even the way we think. This deep state knows that humanity isn't ready to handle the truth, so they feed us crumbs. They keep us distracted, divided, and dependent." The more Langley spoke, the more Samantha realized that this wasn't just about UFOs or alien encounters. It was about a far-reaching plan that spanned decades, one that sought to reshape the world under the shadow of extraterrestrial influence. The politician's words left her shaken. The implications were staggering. A global conspiracy, hidden in plain sight, with an alien agenda at its core. As Langley finished his story, he looked Samantha in the eye. "You have no idea how deep this goes. The truth about the aliens? It's not just a matter of technology, it's a matter of power. You are now going to write this chapter. Make it max 500 words long. Do not include bullet points or chapter heads. Make sure to write in the same tone and writing style as example." As the investigation deepened, Samantha found herself unraveling threads that led to a dark and intricate web of global deception. The more she uncovered, the clearer it became that the truth about extraterrestrial involvement wasn't just hidden by one country or faction. It was a coordinated effort, orchestrated by the highest levels of government across the globe. Governments, she realized, had not merely been ignoring alien encounters, they had been systematically covering them up, weaving a narrative of silence and manipulation that spanned generations. Her breakthrough came when she discovered a series of encrypted emails that suggested high-ranking officials in various world governments had been working together long before the public ever knew of extraterrestrial life. It wasn't just the United States. There were mentions of covert meetings between officials from Russia, China, and even smaller, neutral nations, all allegedly bound by a shared secret, a secret so explosive it could bring down the world's political and economic systems if it were exposed. She reached out to her contacts, piecing together a timeline that seemed to connect these secretive meetings to major events in history: the moon landing, the Cold War arms race, and even the formation of the United Nations. Each significant milestone appeared to have been influenced by unseen hands, carefully guiding humanity's progress, controlling the narrative, and ensuring that no one dared to challenge the hidden truth. In those encrypted emails, Samantha found chilling references to the Pact, a clandestine agreement made between governments and extraterrestrial beings in the aftermath of World War II. The details were vague, but the implications were clear. World leaders had made concessions in exchange for technology, power, and guidance. The further Samantha dug, the more she began to connect dots between the highest echelons of political power and extraterrestrial groups. Some names, like former CIA Director Richard Helms and even UN Secretary-General Hugh Thant, appeared in documents. Figures who, according to insiders, had been involved in negotiations with alien entities during pivotal moments in history. But these weren't just passing meetings. They were deals, promises exchanged, and global decisions made in shadowy back rooms. The alien agenda, it seemed, had long been intertwined with the ambitions of those in power. As Samantha began to confront key government officials about their hidden ties to these extraterrestrial groups, she found herself met with resistance, threats, and eerie silence. Some went so far as to deny ever meeting with her, while others attempted to discredit her findings, accusing her of fabricating stories or being misled by false information. Yet, as the pieces of the puzzle continued to fall into place, it became apparent that the true extent of this conspiracy was far worse than she had ever imagined. The biggest question that lingered in her mind, however, was whether those in power were acting on their own behalf, or if they, too, were pawns in a much larger game. The realization hit her hard. The world wasn't just deceived. It had been manipulated for decades, perhaps longer, by a force far greater than any of them could have imagined. The aliens were here, and they had always been here, but the question now was, why? And who truly controlled the narrative? Samantha was getting closer to the truth. But as the pieces aligned, the danger surrounding her grew more intense. She wasn't just unmasking a great deception. She was now a target in a game of power and secrecy that spanned the entire globe. As Samantha pieced together the final fragments of information, an undeniable truth began to emerge. The aliens weren't merely visitors. They had been here for far longer than anyone had realized. For centuries, they had subtly guided the course of human history, influencing pivotal moments and shaping the very trajectory of civilization. At first, the evidence was buried deep within the encrypted files, hidden in obscure government reports, and whispered in the accounts of those who had witnessed the impossible. But now, as the veil lifted, Samantha saw it with clarity. The alien presence was not a recent phenomenon. It was ancient, intricately woven into the fabric of human development. Every major advancement, every leap in technology or knowledge, seemed to have a strange, unexplained origin. The Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, the space race, each had been marked by sudden bursts of intellectual and technological progress. These periods were no mere coincidences. They were orchestrated. The aliens, Samantha now believed, had nudged humanity forward, guiding evolution and pushing the boundaries of science and discovery. But what was their ultimate goal? The answer came unexpectedly, in a set of documents that had been hidden away in a forgotten vault, guarded by layers of secrecy. These documents spoke of a plan, one that had been in motion for millennia. The aliens, she realized, were not just here to observe. They had a purpose. Their agenda was twofold: to either push humanity toward a new evolutionary leap or to dominate the planet entirely. In their cryptic communications, the aliens had revealed a vision of humanity's future, one that involved either the gradual assimilation of Earth's population into a collective that transcended individual identity, or a controlled evolution that would make humans part of a greater intergalactic hierarchy. The details were hazy, but one thing was clear: the aliens viewed Earth as a pivotal point in the cosmic scheme of things. Whether they sought to uplift humanity or conquer it, they had a hand in shaping its destiny. Samantha's heart raced as she sifted through the final revelations, piecing together the final puzzle. The idea that the aliens had been quietly steering humanity's evolution sent a shiver down her spine. It wasn't just a question of technology or influence, it was a question of control. The aliens had been subtly guiding humanity toward a specific future, one that they had the power to shape or destroy at will. But why? What did they want from Earth? And what would happen once their plan came to fruition? The answers weren't easily found, and Samantha knew that the deeper she dug, the more dangerous the path ahead would become. She had crossed a line, unearthing a truth that had been hidden for centuries. There was no turning back now. As the weight of the revelation settled on her shoulders, she realized that humanity's place in the universe wasn't what it had seemed. It was all part of a larger, more intricate design, one that would soon come to light in ways the world could never have anticipated. Samantha's investigation took an unsettling turn when she began to dig into the reported cases of alien abductions. The stories had always fascinated her: accounts from seemingly ordinary people describing inexplicable experiences, vivid memories of being taken against their will, probed, and studied by beings from another world. But it was when she uncovered a series of classified government reports that the true extent of the cover-up began to emerge. The stories were not just about unexplainable phenomena, they were about manipulation, control, and the deep involvement of government agencies in shaping public perception. It began with a collection of memos from the late 1960s, dating back to a time when the first wave of abduction stories began to surface. The reports detailed how the government had closely monitored these cases, not out of curiosity, but out of concern for public panic. They were aware that the abductions were not isolated incidents. There was a pattern. But what Samantha learned next made her stomach churn. The government wasn't just passive in its handling of these encounters. They had actively sought to discredit the witnesses, labeling them as unstable, mentally ill, or prone to hallucinations. At first, this was a strategy to keep the public from believing that alien contact was real. But as the years went on, the reports began to reveal something darker. The government had been involved in the abductions themselves. They had made agreements with extraterrestrial beings to use abducted individuals in secret experiments. These reports contained disturbing details of humans being used as test subjects in exchange for technology, genetic material, and knowledge. The abductions weren't just for the aliens' research, they were part of a larger, clandestine collaboration between the two parties. Samantha's eyes widened as she read the chilling accounts. The abducted individuals were not just experiencing traumatic encounters, they were subjects in an ongoing series of experiments. Some were subjected to genetic modifications. Others were used as conduits for strange interspecies communication. The government, it seemed, had been using these individuals for a purpose far more sinister than simple scientific curiosity. The classified documents mentioned experiments that focused on hybridization, creating new forms of life, and even testing the effects of extraterrestrial technology on the human body. The deeper she went, the more unsettling it became. The government had manipulated these abductions, using them as cover for their own covert operations. Witnesses were silenced, and the few who tried to speak out were systematically discredited. The aliens had found willing participants, and the government had used them as pawns in a game that was far beyond anything Samantha had imagined. As the enormity of the cover-up settled in, Samantha could hardly believe what she was reading. These weren't just stories of random, isolated events. They were part of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy, a web of deception meant to keep the world in the dark. She had unearthed a truth that not only shattered everything she had known about alien encounters, but revealed the government's darkest secrets. The line between human and extraterrestrial had blurred in ways that no one could have predicted. And now, Samantha had to ask herself, what would happen if the world knew? The deeper Samantha delved into her investigation, the more the shadows around her seemed to stretch, pulling her toward a truth too disturbing to ignore. She had uncovered reports, documents, and whispers about something far beyond what she had imagined underground alien bases. These were not just isolated bunkers or government black sites, but vast complexes where humans and extraterrestrials were working side by side, engaged in projects so secret, so unfathomable, that they had been deliberately erased from public knowledge. It began when she met a retired military officer, a grizzled man who had served in several high-clearance projects throughout the Cold War. His name was Colonel Harris, and despite his initial reluctance to speak, the intensity in his eyes betrayed the truth he had buried for decades. The conversation started innocuously enough, discussions about his career, his time in classified military operations. But as Samantha asked the right questions, a shift occurred. The walls came down. "Have you ever heard of Dulce?" he asked, his voice low. "The base in New Mexico?" Samantha felt a chill run through her. She had heard the rumors, the whispers among conspiracy theorists about Dulce Base, but never took them seriously. Harris, however, was not speaking like a conspiracy theorist. His words were measured, calm, as if he were recounting a painful, undeniable truth. "I wasn't supposed to be there," he continued, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. "But I saw it. Deep underground, huge facilities, different species working together. I didn't believe it at first, thought I was seeing things, but no, they were real. And the humans working with them, they had no fear." Samantha's pulse quickened. She had to hear more, but she knew the risks of pushing too hard. Harris looked at her sharply, as though reading her thoughts. "You think I'm crazy, don't you?" "Well, you're not the first," he said, his voice thick with bitterness. "But I'm telling you, this is real. There are other bases too, all over the world, and there are things down there, things no one should ever know about." He went on to describe underground complexes in remote areas, bases hidden beneath miles of rock, accessible only by secret tunnels and military-grade technology. At these facilities, humans and aliens worked together on joint projects, ranging from advanced weaponry to genetic experiments, projects that had been concealed from the public for decades. Harris's first-hand accounts painted a picture of a hidden world, one that had been operating in the dark, while the rest of humanity remained blissfully ignorant. Samantha's mind raced as she processed his words. Dulce. Other locations. The collaboration. It was too much to absorb, but the evidence was undeniable. These underground bases, these unholy alliances between extraterrestrials and the world's most powerful governments, had been thriving in secrecy, and the implications of such knowledge were both thrilling and terrifying. As she left Harris's apartment, her mind was consumed with a single thought. How far did this go? What other truths were locked beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered? The global phenomenon of UFO sightings had always intrigued Samantha, but as her investigation progressed, it became clear that these events were not just isolated incidents. There was a pattern, one that tied together countless reports from every corner of the world, all subtly hinting at a shared, unspoken truth. Governments, it seemed, had known more than they had let on. The truth was scattered across continents, buried beneath layers of carefully crafted disinformation and secrecy. In the quiet hours of the night, Samantha pored over thousands of UFO reports, some official, some from ordinary citizens, and others from military personnel. The discrepancies were glaring, but what stood out the most was how certain countries had responded to the phenomenon. The United States, with its military-industrial complex and its tendency to cover up sensitive information, had long treated UFO sightings with a mix of denial and ridicule. But then there were countries like Brazil, France, and even Japan, which had far more transparent policies when it came to UFO sightings. These nations had actually declassified records, allowing the public a glimpse into the truth behind the mysterious objects that had been witnessed in their skies. Samantha's research led her to an alarming conclusion. The UFO phenomenon wasn't just a random collection of mysterious objects. It was intricately tied to secret government projects. In countries like the US, much of the UFO activity had been conveniently chalked up to military testing or natural phenomena. Yet in other nations, where UFO sightings were met with less skepticism, the correlation between sightings and military research seemed undeniable. She found herself drawn to reports from Russia, a country notorious for its opaque government dealings. The Soviet Union had conducted extensive investigations into UFO sightings, many of which remained classified for decades. Yet some documents, released after the fall of the Iron Curtain, hinted at covert projects focused on the very phenomena that had sparked global fascination. These reports indicated that the USSR had been aware of extraterrestrial presence on Earth much earlier than previously thought, and had even launched their own military operations to track and study UFOs. The question loomed larger with every new piece of information Samantha uncovered. Why were some governments more open about UFO sightings than others? In nations like France, where government transparency had become somewhat of a national virtue, UFO sightings were documented, analyzed, and even discussed in public forums. The official position, while still cautious, was much more inclusive than the military's typical response in the United States. Why the difference? Was it simply a matter of national policy, or were these countries, like Brazil and France, aware of a larger, hidden truth, one that they felt compelled to acknowledge? As Samantha dug deeper, she began to piece together a disturbing reality. The global UFO phenomenon was not a random series of events, but a carefully orchestrated stage upon which the world's most powerful governments had played their parts. Some were concealing the truth, while others, perhaps unknowingly, were allowing pieces of it to slip through the cracks. The question wasn't whether extraterrestrial life existed. It was why the governments of the world were so intent on hiding it. And more importantly, what were they protecting? As Samantha delved further into her investigation, she couldn't help but notice the growing movement that had been quietly gaining momentum for years, the disclosure movement. It was a strange, yet powerful force, driven by people who believed the truth about extraterrestrial life had been kept from the public for far too long. Activists, whistleblowers, former military personnel, and even scientists, each one had a piece of the puzzle, and together they were pushing harder than ever for governments to come clean. Samantha met with several key figures who had been part of the movement from its early days. One of them, a former Air Force officer named Jack, had spent years on the inside, working with classified UFO programs before retiring under strange circumstances. Jack had seen firsthand the lengths to which the government had gone to keep extraterrestrial encounters under wraps. His eyes were tired, but there was a fire in them when he spoke about the growing push for transparency. "You can only stay silent for so long," Jack said. His voice tinged with the weight of years spent holding back secrets. "The people are waking up. They're demanding answers, and soon they'll get them." The disclosure movement had started slowly, with small groups of believers, but now it had evolved into a force to be reckoned with. They had organized petitions, held rallies, and flooded social media with demands for governments to release their classified UFO files. Their most vocal champions were those who had once been part of the system, but had been silenced or disillusioned by the secrecy. Samantha met others who had come forward as whistleblowers, like Laura, a former government contractor who had worked on deep space technology and had witnessed alien-related files buried under layers of security. Laura was quiet, but her words were sharp and deliberate. "There is no way the governments don't know about them," she said, almost in a whisper, as though afraid someone might hear. "They've been hiding it for decades, but the truth is coming. They can't stop it forever." It wasn't just ordinary citizens or former government employees who were demanding answers. The movement had gained the support of several high-profile figures, including celebrities, academics, and even former presidents. They were all calling for one thing: an official acknowledgement that Earth had been visited by extraterrestrials. But the deeper Samantha dug, the more she realized that the fight for disclosure wasn't as simple as just asking for the truth. There were forces at play, political, military, and corporate, who had a vested interest in keeping the truth hidden. The more Samantha learned, the clearer it became that the movement was on the verge of something big. There were cracks in the system, and more people were beginning to question the narratives they'd been told for so long. Governments had successfully kept extraterrestrial life under wraps for decades, but as the disclosure movement grew louder, it seemed that their grip on the truth was finally starting to slip. The question now wasn't whether the truth would be revealed, it was when. Samantha had heard whispers of the alien hybrid program before stories of humans unknowingly being part of extraterrestrial experiments. The idea had always sounded like something from a science fiction novel, too far-fetched to be true. But as she dug deeper into the shadows of government cover-ups, she found herself face to face with someone who claimed to be the product of one of these very experiments. Her name was Elena, a woman with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor, yet there was a certain unease in her voice as she spoke about her past. Elena didn't fit the usual mold of a whistleblower. She wasn't a former military officer or a disgruntled scientist. She was someone who had lived through the terrifying reality of what Samantha was investigating. Elena claimed that she had been part of a human-alien hybrid program since childhood, though her memories were fragmented, veiled in a haze of trauma and suppression. "They told me it was all a dream," Elena said, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the table between them. "But I know what I saw. I know what was done to me." Elena spoke of being taken from her home as a young child, of being subjected to strange procedures by beings who weren't entirely human. She described how, over the years, her body had been altered in ways she couldn't fully comprehend, but which she felt deeply in her bones. There were flashes of memories, alien faces, cold metal tables, the sensation of something foreign inside her. But the clearest memory was of a voice, one that called to her in the dark of her childhood nights, whispering in languages she didn't understand but could feel in the depths of her being. "They were trying to create something," Elena explained, her voice growing softer now, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "A bridge between their world and ours. They needed us. Or maybe they just needed something from us." The more Elena spoke, the more Samantha realized that this wasn't just another conspiracy theory. There was an unsettling conviction in her words. Elena wasn't telling a story of distant aliens experimenting on unwilling subjects. She was recounting a very personal nightmare, one that had shaped every part of her life. Samantha pressed further. Had she ever met anyone else like her? Had there been others involved in the program? Elena paused, her eyes darkening. "There are more of us, many more. Some of them don't even know. The memories have been erased or buried, but there are others. People who don't understand what they've become, what they've been part of." As Elena continued to reveal her painful recollections, Samantha's mind raced. Could this be true? Had extraterrestrials really been manipulating human biology for decades? And if so, how far had they gone? What was the ultimate goal of this hybrid program? Samantha had uncovered many dark secrets on her journey, but this was something new, something far more sinister. As Elena's testimony unfolded, it became clear. The truth wasn't just hidden in government archives. It was woven into the very fabric of human existence. and it was far stranger than anyone could have imagined. The deeper Samantha delved into the world of alien conspiracies, the more she began to uncover a disturbing theme: mind control. At first, it seemed like a ridiculous extension of the already outlandish theories she was encountering, but as she connected the dots between government programs, classified documents, and testimonies from whistleblowers, the reality of it began to crystallize. Could extraterrestrials really be manipulating human thoughts, bending people to their will without them even realizing it? Samantha's first real breakthrough came when she stumbled upon a series of highly classified documents, redacted beyond recognition, but still containing enough information to spark concern. These reports, dated back to the 1960s, mentioned advanced neural manipulation techniques being studied by both government and military agencies. The language was clinical, almost cold, and spoke of experiments involving unidentified technologies capable of influencing cognitive functions on a massive scale. What caught her attention was the use of the word alien. It was buried deep in the text, but it was there, alluding to the idea that the source of this technology might not have come from Earth. She reached out to a former intelligence officer, Mark Jennings, who had once worked in a top-secret military unit that handled unusual technologies. His interview was nothing short of chilling. Jennings spoke about a covert project that had started after Roswell, where scientists had gained access to alien technology capable of interacting directly with the human brain. They weren't just studying it, though they were using it. They had this device, something small, almost like a chip, Jennings explained, his voice shaky, as if recalling something he wished he could forget. It could emit frequencies that affected brain waves. They didn't tell us exactly what it was for at first, but the first time I saw it used, it was like flipping a switch. People became compliant, docile. It was like their will had been removed. Samantha was stunned, struggling to digest the weight of his words. Mind control had always seemed like science fiction, a plot device for movies and books, but this wasn't a story, it was real. According to Jennings, the technology was so sophisticated that it could not only influence individual thoughts, but also entire populations. The implications were staggering. Governments could be puppets of alien forces, their decisions and actions manipulated without them even realizing it. Was the entire global political landscape being shaped by unseen hands? Jennings didn't have all the answers, but he pointed Samantha to other reports, documents about covert meetings with extraterrestrials and human-alien hybrids, where mind control technology was a central topic. He believed that the aliens were working with governments not just to hide their existence, but to shape humanity's direction. They had planted the seed of control, and it was growing unchecked. The more Samantha uncovered, the more she felt the weight of the conspiracy pressing down on her. This was no longer just about UFO sightings or secret military experiments. It was about human autonomy itself. Had extraterrestrials already infiltrated the very core of human civilization, manipulating thoughts and actions on a scale unimaginable? And if so, who else was under their control? Samantha's research had led her to a staggering discovery. There was a hidden connection between the Moon, Mars, and the extraterrestrial agenda. It all began when a series of classified documents, leaked through an anonymous source, surfaced on the dark web. These documents detailed secret missions conducted by multiple space agencies, missions not publicly acknowledged, missions that had unearthed evidence of alien activity on both the Moon and Mars. According to these reports, both celestial bodies had long been hubs for extraterrestrial research, housing remnants of civilizations far older than humanity's recorded history. Her pursuit of this information brought her to a former NASA astronaut, Richard Hargrave, who had been involved in lunar and Martian explorations years earlier. Hargrave's accounts were jarring, peppered with both disbelief and regret. He spoke of clandestine missions to the Moon, missions that went far beyond simple exploration. According to him, The Apollo missions had been a smokescreen, designed to appease the public's curiosity, while the real work was happening in the shadows. "We weren't just taking rocks," Hargrave told her. "We were digging into something much older, something that was already there, waiting to be found." Hargrave described ancient structures on the far side of the moon, structures that defied all human understanding of engineering. Some were buried beneath the lunar surface, while others were in plain sight, large, geometric formations, impossible to explain by natural processes. These structures were not of earthly design, Hargrave claimed, and the knowledge of their existence had been kept from the public. He was hesitant to go into detail about the artifacts they discovered, but the few clues he did reveal were enough to send chills down Samantha's spine. There were items that could manipulate energy, things that couldn't be replicated with our technology. "I don't know who built them, but I can tell you, it wasn't us." Even more shocking was his revelation about Mars. NASA's missions to the Red Planet had uncovered evidence of alien artifacts, buried beneath its dusty surface, artifacts with technology that outpaced anything humanity had ever conceived. Hargrave shared a secret image with her, an ancient, ruined structure on Mars, with intricate markings and an aura of something deeply alien. "It's not just about finding life," he explained. "It's about understanding what came before us and why they left." As Samantha sifted through these accounts, piecing together what she had learned, it became clear that the Moon and Mars were not simply locations of scientific curiosity. They were relics of a far larger story, one in which Earth had played a minor role. The artifacts uncovered on these celestial bodies weren't just archaeological wonders. They were pieces of an alien plan that had been set into motion long before humanity had even begun to look to the stars. There was something much bigger at play, and the truth was hidden deep within the craters of the Moon and the desolate plains of Mars. Both worlds held secrets, and the pieces were finally starting to fall into place. What had these extraterrestrial visitors left behind, and what was their ultimate purpose in guiding humanity toward this inevitable revelation? Samantha knew the answers were out there, buried under layers of secrecy, waiting for the world to uncover them. Samantha had always suspected that Earth's strange history with extraterrestrials went deeper than the occasional sighting or unexplained phenomenon. But when she uncovered a trove of classified documents detailing an ongoing, covert war between rival alien factions, the true scale of the situation began to dawn on her. These weren't just the occasional visitations or hidden experiments. Earth was the focal point of something far more dangerous. The fate of humanity itself was hanging by a thread, caught between powerful forces from beyond the stars. The documents, many of which were encoded and heavily redacted, were released by a whistleblower who had been part of a top-secret government initiative to monitor alien activity on Earth. Among the startling revelations was a map of known alien factions, some of which had been active on Earth for centuries. Their motives varied. Some sought to influence humanity, others to control it, and a few had far more sinister plans. But the most shocking part of these documents was the stark realization that these factions had been vying for control of Earth for decades, if not longer. One alien race, known only as the Zithians, was identified as the primary instigators. They had infiltrated human governments, corporations, and even scientific institutions, subtly guiding Earth's technological advancements, while ensuring that humanity remained unaware of the true nature of their benefactors. According to the documents, the Zithians had been manipulating the course of human history, from the development of the atomic bomb to the space race, all with one goal: to make Earth the perfect breeding ground for their kind. But they weren't alone in their ambitions. The Drakari, another alien faction, had a very different agenda. They sought not to manipulate humanity but to enslave it, using advanced mind control technology to subjugate the planet's population. Their agents had been working in the shadows, abducting key figures and implanting them with controlling devices to further their dominance. Samantha had already encountered whispers of the Drakkari's influence through the stories of abductees and witnesses who described a chilling sense of being controlled by invisible forces. In her investigation, she also uncovered a third faction, one that was less known but no less powerful: the Aelorians. The Aelorians were the most cryptic of all. They believed in the preservation of Earth's sovereignty, but their methods were just as dangerous as the others. They were the secret keepers, the ones who had been watching humanity from the sidelines, silently ensuring that Earth didn't fall completely under the sway of the other factions. They saw themselves as protectors, but their motives were just as murky as their methods, leading Samantha to question their true intentions. The deeper she dug, the more Samantha realized how high the stakes were. Earth was more than just a prize in an intergalactic war. It was a pawn in a game of power between races with vastly different visions for the future. And as the documents detailed various covert operations, from underground bases to satellite surveillance, it became clear that the battle for Earth's future was being fought on a scale the public could never begin to comprehend. Samantha had stumbled upon something no one was meant to know, and the more she learned, the more she felt the weight of the truth. The fate of humanity might already be sealed. But one thing was certain: the war for Earth had only just begun. Samantha had spent years chasing down the elusive thread of alien activity, but nothing could prepare her for the breakthrough she was about to experience. Late one night, buried in a mountain of intercepted data, she uncovered something that stopped her cold communications between extraterrestrial races, transmissions that had been quietly filtering into Earth's airwaves for years. The signals weren't random, they were too structured, too deliberate, and they contained a hidden pattern. It was as if the universe itself was speaking in a language humanity was only beginning to understand. At first, the signals appeared to be just another anomaly, a string of coded frequencies, distorted and weak, buried beneath layers of noise. But when Samantha took a closer look, she noticed something she hadn't seen before: repeating sequences, precise intervals, and an underlying rhythm that hinted at intention. These weren't the usual radio interference or random bursts from distant galaxies. They were deliberate, and they were aimed at Earth. The more she examined the data, the clearer it became that these signals were not isolated events. There was a recurring pattern, stretching across decades, hidden in plain sight. Samantha traced them back to the early days of the space race, just after the launch of Sputnik, when governments had first begun listening for alien transmissions. But what they hadn't understood back then was that the signals weren't just noise. They were messages, carefully encoded, waiting for someone to decipher their meaning. The discovery sent a shiver down her spine. It was almost as if the extraterrestrials had been watching and waiting for humanity to catch up, testing their readiness for contact. Some of the signals seemed almost like greetings, simple mathematical patterns, and prime number sequences that could be easily interpreted. Others, however, were far more complex, layered with frequency shifts and encrypted data that hinted at something far more advanced. This was a language of communication, designed for those who could understand the deeper nuances of the universe's cosmic language. Samantha began to connect the dots, suspecting that these transmissions weren't just between extraterrestrial races. Some of them seemed directed at specific points on Earth, as if they were trying to communicate with certain individuals, governments, or even specific locations. She had heard of rumors about secret communication programs in the government, but she hadn't thought there was any real basis to them. Now, she wasn't so sure. The patterns were too intentional, too precise to be coincidence. The aliens had been reaching out for years, and the world had been oblivious to their messages. What disturbed her most was the realization that Earth might have been part of an intergalactic conversation for far longer than anyone had suspected. Were these extraterrestrial races trying to guide humanity, or were they simply monitoring our progress? And more importantly, what did they expect in return? The answers lay hidden in the signals, buried beneath layers of encrypted data, waiting for someone like her to uncover the truth. It was a revelation that changed everything. Samantha wasn't just uncovering evidence of alien life. She was staring into the heart of a cosmic dialogue that had been unfolding for millennia. Samantha had uncovered much in her years of investigation, but the whispers she was hearing now sent a cold shiver down her spine. The rumors had always seemed too unbelievable, too fantastical to take seriously. But as she dug deeper, the evidence began to accumulate: fragmented reports, cryptic statements from military whistleblowers, and mysterious leaks from classified sources that suggested something far darker was unfolding. There were whispers of an alien agenda far more insidious than mere surveillance or communication: the creation of a human-alien hybrid army, designed to prepare Earth for an invasion. At first, Samantha couldn't believe what she was hearing, but the more she spoke to former military personnel, the clearer the picture became. These weren't just casual rumors, but detailed accounts from those who had been involved in high-level projects, individuals who had seen the disturbing results of these experiments firsthand. One former Navy officer, shaken by the memories, described secretive operations at a research facility hidden deep within the mountains, where human subjects were allegedly subjected to hybridization procedures. He spoke of advanced alien technology, of DNA manipulation and gene splicing techniques that blended human and extraterrestrial biology in ways that defied understanding. According to the officer, the hybridization project had been underway for decades, with the aim of creating a new breed of soldier, a race of beings with enhanced physical and mental capabilities. These hybrids would be able to communicate telepathically, endure extreme environments, and possess advanced intelligence, all characteristics that would make them formidable against any threat, human or alien. But there was something even more chilling in the officer's words. He claimed that the ultimate goal wasn't just the creation of a new army, but the preparation for a coming invasion by alien forces that had been working behind the scenes for years, manipulating humanity for their own purposes. Samantha pushed further, reaching out to others who had been involved in similar projects. Some were more guarded, fearful of retribution, but others had seen enough to speak out. One technician, a former employee of a classified government lab, spoke of experiments in which human volunteers were injected with alien biological material, their cells altered in ways that blurred the lines between species. She described how these individuals exhibited strange abilities, heightened senses, unnatural agility, and, most disturbingly, an unnatural connection to the alien entities that had been involved in the process. They weren't just hybrids in body, but in mind, too, connected to something far beyond human understanding. The deeper Samantha dug, the more unsettling the information became. There were reports of hybrids already living among us, working in secretive roles, their true identities hidden from the public. But the most terrifying part was the realization that these hybrids were not merely soldiers in the making. They were also intended to be the key to human survival in the event of an extraterrestrial conquest. As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Samantha realized the scope of the conspiracy she had stumbled upon. It wasn't just a story of hidden experiments, it was a story of manipulation, fear, and the looming shadow of an alien agenda that had been shaping human history for far longer than anyone had ever suspected. The hybrid army was just the beginning, and the true horror of what was to come was only now starting to unfold. Samantha had always suspected that the truth about extraterrestrials went beyond government secrecy and covert military operations. But as she delved deeper into her investigation, she uncovered a web of power, influence, and dark alliances that extended far beyond the public sphere. This was no longer just about classified files or hidden bases. This was about the shadowy network of elites, organizations, and influential figures who had been manipulating the narrative for generations. She was now on the trail of something far more insidious, a covert society that had been colluding with extraterrestrial beings to control humanity's fate. The evidence was circumstantial at first, small clues that led her to a series of meetings held in private, away from the prying eyes of the media and the public. Samantha managed to infiltrate one such gathering, a secret conference hosted by an influential think tank. The participants, many of whom were known leaders in politics, finance, and global security, spoke in hushed tones, as though aware that their words could shatter the fragile illusion of normalcy they had worked so hard to maintain. What she overheard there was nothing short of astonishing. These elites weren't merely concerned with managing the world's affairs. They were actively shaping them with the help of extraterrestrial technologies and knowledge. She learned about a covert society, an enigmatic group that had been operating in the shadows for centuries. Its origins traced back to early explorers and ancient rulers who had encountered alien civilizations. This society, known only to a select few, had formed an unholy alliance with extraterrestrials who had offered advanced technology and knowledge in exchange for something much more valuable: control. The leaders of this society had become gatekeepers to this hidden knowledge, ensuring that only those they deemed worthy had access to the secrets that could change the course of human history. The society had woven itself into the very fabric of global power structures, operating behind the scenes to suppress any knowledge of alien existence. Samantha discovered that many of the world's most influential leaders were either members of this society or had been coerced into silence with the promise of advanced technologies that not only reshaped the global economy, but were also used for mind control and population management. The more she learned, the clearer it became that the elites had been complicit in a global cover-up for decades, manipulating the masses while quietly working with extraterrestrials to maintain their dominance. But the conspiracy went deeper. Samantha uncovered damning evidence that these elites had been involved in experiments of their own, using the alien technology to create superhuman individuals, soldiers, and even hybrid beings, all designed to further the society's goals. These beings were often hidden in plain sight, living among ordinary people, their true origins kept secret for fear of triggering widespread panic. The entire global system had become a puppet show, with the extraterrestrial alliance pulling the strings. As the pieces of this dark puzzle fell into place, Samantha understood the full extent of the conspiracy. It wasn't just about covering up alien existence, it was about controlling the very future of humanity. And the more she uncovered, the more dangerous her mission became. The unseen hand of this covert society was everywhere, and if she was to expose the truth, she would need to go up against a network that had the power to erase anyone who threatened to reveal its darkest secrets. Samantha had always suspected that the government's role in suppressing the truth about extraterrestrial life went beyond mere cover-ups and hidden documents. As she dug deeper into her investigation, she stumbled upon a chilling revelation: the psychological manipulation of the general public. It wasn't just about secrecy. It was about ensuring that people didn't wake up to the truth. A subtle, yet effective, system of control had been designed to keep humanity in the dark. A system that manipulated the very core of how people perceived reality. She first heard about the sleepers from an anonymous source, someone who claimed to have worked within a government agency specializing in psychological operations. According to the source, there were individuals, sleeper agents, who had been implanted with false memories, conditioning, and triggers that made them vulnerable to manipulation. These agents were ordinary citizens, seemingly harmless, but when activated, they became pawns in a larger psychological game. Their purpose? To suppress any knowledge of alien life and erase anyone who threatened to expose it. Samantha wasn't sure if she could trust this tip, but the chilling details gnawed at her. She had to find out if the theory was true. Her search led her to a small, unassuming town on the outskirts of the desert. There, she found a man named Thomas, a former government contractor who had once worked in intelligence. He was the first sleeper agent she encountered, and his story was unsettling. Thomas seemed to live a normal life, but when Samantha spoke to him about extraterrestrials, his demeanor changed. His eyes grew vacant, as if something within him had been shut off. He spoke in monotone, as though reciting lines he had been conditioned to repeat. The words felt rehearsed, controlled. Samantha pressed him further, and suddenly, a switch flipped. His face hardened, his eyes narrowing. "You don't know what you're getting into," he whispered, his voice low and threatening. "You think you can wake people up? It's not that simple. You're being manipulated too." Before Samantha could respond, he stood up abruptly, his posture rigid and controlled. "You should leave now, while you still can," he warned, his tone shifting to one of cold authority. "They're watching. They'll come for you if you keep digging." Her pulse quickened, but she couldn't back down now. As Thomas turned and walked away, she felt a shiver run down her spine. He was a man who had been programmed to suppress the truth, an agent of a system that controlled not only what people knew, but how they thought. This encounter only confirmed her worst fears. The government's manipulation wasn't just about hiding information. It was about controlling the very minds of those who could potentially reveal the truth. These sleeper agents were everywhere, implanted with false realities that made them into unwitting defenders of the lie. Samantha realized that to uncover the full extent of this conspiracy, she would have to confront these agents head-on if she could stay one step ahead of the dark forces that had been watching her every move. Samantha sat at her cluttered desk, the papers and documents strewn across its surface like a chaotic map of a journey she hadn't yet completed. But this time, it was different. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and what she had uncovered over the past few weeks was more than just fragments of a hidden truth. It was a blueprint, a plan for something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. It was an encrypted message from a whistleblower she had met only a few days ago. He was a high-ranking official within a top-secret organization that had ties to global intelligence agencies. The message, coded and laced with layers of deception, hinted at a singular event, one that would alter the trajectory of humanity forever. Samantha had to decode it, piece by piece, until it finally became clear. Alien visitation was imminent. The documents pointed to a series of meetings held behind closed doors among world leaders, scientists, and military commanders, meetings that discussed the preparation for the arrival. The timing was terrifyingly close. It wasn't a matter of if anymore, it was when. An advanced alien civilization, one that had been monitoring Earth for centuries, was about to make contact. The plans laid out in the document were chilling. Entire governments were already working to establish protocols for this unprecedented event. Some were hopeful, believing this would be the dawn of a new age of knowledge and peace. But others, particularly those with military backgrounds, were preparing for a far more ominous scenario. They feared that the aliens, having watched humanity for so long, would use the moment of contact to assert their control over the planet, perhaps even imposing their will on Earth's nations. Samantha's mind raced as she tried to digest the weight of what she had learned. The world wasn't ready for this. The government had done everything it could to suppress the truth for decades, keeping people in the dark, maintaining a carefully constructed narrative that alien life was a myth, a fantasy. Now, the truth was barreling toward Earth at full force. She knew it was only a matter of time before the entire world would be forced to face the reality that their place in the universe was far more precarious than they had ever imagined. As she stared at the message on her screen, Samantha could almost feel the weight of the coming moment. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized that the countdown had already begun. The event was unavoidable, and the world was about to change in ways it wasn't prepared for. The truth was finally going to break free, and humanity would be forced to reckon with the knowledge that they weren't alone in the cosmos. The question now wasn't whether the aliens would arrive, it was what humanity would do when they did. Would they accept their place in the universe, or would they fight for control? The answers would come soon enough. But for now, Samantha knew she had to get to the heart of the conspiracy before it was too late to stop it. The world seemed to hold its breath as the moment of disclosure arrived. It was the kind of moment that would be remembered for generations, a moment that humanity would never be the same again. As Samantha watched the unfolding broadcast, her pulse raced. The news was everywhere, on every channel, in every corner of the internet. Governments across the globe had finally done what they had spent decades avoiding. They had opened the floodgates and revealed the truth. Aliens had not only been visiting Earth for centuries, they had been here all along, influencing events in ways the public could never have imagined. The broadcast was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. It began with images of extraterrestrial craft hovering above major cities, their designs unlike anything human technology had ever produced. The footage was real, the ships undeniable. And then came the faces, the beings who had watched humanity from the shadows, who had interacted with world leaders, scientists, and military officials for decades. They weren't here to conquer. They weren't here to wage war. They were here to make contact and reveal their purpose, an ancient alliance that had shaped human history in ways few had ever understood. Samantha had been in the right place at the right time, a journalist on the verge of a revelation so huge it would reshape the future of civilization. But in this moment, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. It was her voice, the voice of truth, that had helped push this moment forward. She had spent years uncovering fragments of this hidden world, pulling threads together, and now, with the truth finally out, she was being thrust into the spotlight. The world needed her now, more than ever. As the cameras focused on her during a special live interview, the weight of it all hit her. She had always suspected that humanity's history wasn't what it seemed, that the veil of secrecy surrounding extraterrestrial life had hidden more than just UFO sightings. But now, standing in front of the cameras, she saw the future laid out before her. It was a future where humanity would no longer be isolated, no longer in the dark about its place in the universe. The aliens spoke through a translator, their voices calm and measured. They explained how their presence had been woven into the fabric of human history, how they had been here long before the first civilizations rose, guiding humanity from the shadows, always watching, always waiting for the moment when the world was ready to know the truth. They spoke of peace, of knowledge, and of an ancient purpose that stretched far beyond Earth. The questions were endless, but one thing was clear: the age of secrecy was over. Samantha listened as the truth she had spent years chasing unraveled before her eyes. The world was changing, and so was she. The truth was now undeniable, and her role in revealing it could never be erased. There would be no going back. The future was here, and it was no longer about what had been hidden, it was about what was to come. The world had shifted irrevocably. The truth was no longer a whispered secret in shadowy corners. It had become the foundation upon which the future would be built. As the days passed since the great reveal, the initial shock began to settle, and the overwhelming sense of awe was tempered by the gravity of what humanity now faced. The knowledge that we were not alone, that we never had been, was a revelation both terrifying and exhilarating. Samantha sat by the window, gazing at the city below, its lights twinkling like 1,000 tiny stars. It was a sight she had seen countless times before, but tonight everything felt different. The world was no longer just Earth-centric, no longer bound by the limited horizon of human experience. In her hands, she held the weight of an immense responsibility. She had become more than just a journalist. She was a witness to the dawn of a new era. The streets were filled with a strange kind of quiet. People walked, talked, and went about their daily routines, but there was a lingering sense of change in the air. Some were in disbelief, struggling to accept the magnitude of what had been revealed, while others embraced the truth with open arms, eager to explore what lay ahead. Governments, religious institutions, and scientific communities were grappling with the realization that the universe was far more complex than anyone had ever imagined. For some, it was a crisis of faith, while for others, it was a call to action, a challenge to rise to a new level of understanding. Samantha knew that humanity's place in the cosmos would never be the same again. But with the uncertainty came an undeniable sense of hope. The aliens, the beings who had long watched over humanity, had not come to conquer. They had come to share their knowledge, to offer a hand in the vast, unknown expanse of space. The universe, they had said, was filled with potential, and humanity now had a seat at the table. It was an invitation to learn, to evolve, and to become part of a greater cosmic community. As she looked out at the horizon, a profound sense of peace washed over her. The journey had been long, full of danger and uncertainty, but it had led to this moment. She had fought for the truth, and now, the truth was clear for everyone to see. There was still much to learn, many questions to ask, and paths to navigate. But one thing was certain: humanity was no longer alone in the universe. The future was open, and with it came the promise of new beginnings. The dawn of a new era had broken, and the world was wide with possibility.